you go out there in the wilderness, I said, do you see creation? He's like, no. And so I'm like, okay, Lord, where do I go from here?
Either everything came from nothing or everything came from something or someone. Well, that was a few minutes ago, brother.
And now, the Flaming Sword.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Darin. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I thought we'd talk a little bit about why we believe what we believe.
Does that even matter?
I think it does.
It's probably a good idea to know that.
It might be important to our audience. Otherwise, we're done already, I guess. I think what we'll do here is just from a subjective point of view, which really from a Christianity point of view, I would say it's even objective. But just for the sake of the audience, we may get some agnostics, some atheists, other people listening, or just some people who are searching. They may just argue, well, you're a Christian, that's subjective.
Right.
You believe in God, that's subjective. So just using that line of reasoning from a subjective point of view, not bringing in Christian scripture, just bringing in the idea of God, why we believe in God. Why don't you start, and then I'll come in and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and I think I'll just throw a name out there right off the bat. There was a kind of a philosopher who was a Christian named Francis Schaeffer, and he talked about sort of pre-evangelism. And evangelism is basically telling people about Jesus and encouraging them to follow Jesus too. And he thought that having some of these arguments, kind of philosophical arguments, might be a way to pre-evangelize, to at least open the door up a little bit, just for somebody to open their mind. And then from there, sometimes it's easier to lead people. But I think, and you actually mentioned this earlier also as we were talking before the podcast, and I don't know if you know Frank Turek or that name, but he wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And one of the things that's interesting is when you look at worldviews, everybody has to have a starting point for why they believe what they believe. And in one sense, all of us have to take a little jump somewhere, or what some people might call a leap of faith. When I think about a leap of faith, I don't think of it as being faith without evidence, but we've got a certain amount of evidence, but we kind of have to go with that evidence. We don't always have everything accumulated we'd like to have. And so in worldviews, you have to compare. So you've got the Christian worldview versus an atheistic worldview versus maybe another religion or philosophy. And with atheism, if you kind of take it back to origins, and of course this goes into a big topic, but just to keep it kind of concise here, you've essentially got with atheism, everything coming from nothing. And with Christianity, you've got everything coming from a somebody. And even right there, to me, it takes more faith to believe that somehow everything came from nothing. I'm a musician. I know you're a musician too. And every song I've ever heard somebody wrote.
Yes.
For me, I have, I'm kind of an interesting mix maybe, because I don't have a real natural mind towards.
You're interesting, all right.
Yeah, that's
We're
right.
not going to go there right now, but
we can just say that's the end of the podcast right there. No one would disagree that I'm an interesting mix. But anyway, I don't have a real natural bent towards math and science the way that some people would. In other words, it's not something where I wake up in the morning and I just can't wait to get to that. But for me, it was a natural part of my faith, because I have always been curious. And I've been kind of more of an artsy guy. I like to, music and reading and things like that. But I think even as a young person, before I was a Christian, in fact, I remember one particular experience where I'm kind of looking up, and I guess you mentioned to talk more about objectives. So this is it's subjective. So right there, maybe I'm getting into that, but they kind of overlap sometimes. And I was sitting out with a friend, just kind of sitting on some porch steps and looking up at the sky, and his name is Tony, and he's saying, there's just got to be something up there. And so in a sense where that's subjective is where somebody could just say, well, there's got to be something up there just because I want there to be, or I feel more comfortable with the idea of a God than just being an atheist or something where all there is. But where that becomes objective is that there are actually ways and good arguments to be made for that. And I think we're actually going to listen to part of a clip a little bit later, but that's where those objective questions start, is we we look up at the sky and we just wonder, okay, is there something out there or not? And then what we have to do objectively is think through those. What are the possibilities? Is there a God? Is there not a God? If there is a God, is he more of a force? Sometimes people talk about the divine watchmaker, or this being of some sort got things in motion and then left it alone, or is he a personal God? But I think those are, for me, kind of the launching pads that lead us to those objective questions, and where we can get into a little philosophy and science before we're even talking about a personal Christian God.
Yeah, I think that's the testimony from most Christians, just the creation itself. And we know the scripture, and we'll get into that at some point, but that's really the same. That's kind of my testimony too. I think you and I have talked before, but I had something happen to me when I was around 8 to 10 years old, just playing in my mom and dad's backyard. I just had this feeling. I remember it not necessarily vividly, but it's always stuck with me, that I had this question of, who am I? Am I even here? How did I get here?
Is that what your parents were wondering when you're
That's
outside?
Probably what maybe that's what happened. Maybe I heard them questioning, how did we get this guy?
Who is this kid?
But that stuck with me. And then now, fast forwarding all these years, I told you about a place prior to the podcast. We had discussed that I have this place that I go outside of where I live here, and I call it Prayer Road because it's a great place to pray. And I go out there, and there's, the closest house is probably maybe a mile or so away, maybe 2 miles. And it's just this flat farm ground. And you go out there on a beautiful day. Yeah. And just from the Christian perspective, it's just overwhelming to me. I look up at the sky and I see this thing called the sun. That's the first light bulb. And it lights everything up. I see this sky that turns blue during the day. And it's amazing how that works, and it blocks out the night. And I just can't help but to see creation. Now, I know that the scientific minds will come in and, well, here's how you explain, here's how the sun's burning and here's how the sky is blue. But that don't describe how it got there. That don't, just because we can describe how we can see something that God's doing, how he's working it, still doesn't describe how it got there. And so it's overwhelming to me, just the witness of creation. I got kind of a funny story, but where I worked before, I was talking to a guy, and he hunted a lot. And I don't know if he was an atheist or not, but he definitely wasn't a Christian. And he was talking about going out hunting. And I said, I thought, okay, here's a good opportunity for me to kind of witness to him a little bit. And I said, when you go out there in the wilderness, I said, do you see creation? He's like, no. And so I'm like, okay, Lord, where do I go from here? So
I hate it when it backfires like that. That's no fun at all.
I think I hit the brakes on that one and moved on. But anyway, just from the subjective point of view, I see all that. You're saying that you see all of it.
Right.
I think that most Christians agree with that.
Right. And let me just interject for a minute. One of the things that's going to be important in this podcast, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics, but as we talk about why we believe what we believe, one of the things that was important for me to learn, and that I think might help our listeners, is that first, not all, but some scientists believe that science answers questions that science is not designed to answer, and they try to take science over into the philosophical realm. Philosophy asks questions like, why am I here? What you were asking, what's the meaning? What's my purpose? Science isn't designed to answer those questions. Science is designed to test things and to see how they work and how they function. And so that's just important too, because some people will say, well, now we live in an age of science, and science answers and addresses all the questions of life, and it simply doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. I think on that note, you were mentioning philosophy. So what we're talking about here, and right now just on the basics, is Christian apologetics. We're trying to give a defense of why we believe what we believe. And people who have never heard of that term, apologetics is just, that's what it means. Is that Greek or what?
I don't know. I was confused because I thought that was when one Christian was mad at another one, and then either one apologized.
And he apologized. That's what most people, I think that's what most people think when they hear it. But basically, when you hear it, we may mention that term. So anyone that's not familiar with it, that just means the defense of the faith.
Right.
And what I was leading into is I got a clip here of a guy by the name of William Lane Craig, and he is a Christian philosopher.
I know him as Bill.
As Bill Craig, yes. And he gets into some, what's that?
Oh, I don't really know him. He's
I thought you just meant that you call him Bill all the time. I hear people refer to him as Bill a lot.
Yeah.
So, but I think I'll play this clip of him describing why there has to be a God, why we should believe there's a God. It's just a brief clip. And then on the other side, we can discuss that a little. And then I think a little later on his website, he's got 8 points of why we should believe there's a God, the defense of the faith. So let me pull up this clip here.
Perfect.
Now, as the cause of space and time, this being must be an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being of unfathomable power. Moreover, it must be personal as well. Why? Well, first of all, because this event must be beyond space and time. Therefore, it cannot be physical or material. Now, there are only 2 kinds of things that fit that description. Either abstract objects like numbers or an intelligent mind. But abstract objects can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows that the cause of the universe is a personal, transcendent mind. Secondly, how else could a timeless cause give rise to a temporal effect like the universe? If the cause were an impersonal set of necessary and sufficient conditions, then the cause could never exist without its effect. If the cause were permanently present, then the effect would be permanently present as well. The only way for the cause to be timeless and the effect to begin in time is for the cause to be a personal agent who freely chooses to create an event in time without any antecedent determining conditions. And thus we are brought not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator.
Okay. So what do you think of that, Bill or William? He is a great Christian apologist. There's no doubt about it, especially on the philosophical side. And you tell me what you got out of that, because I'm pretty sure I know what he's saying, and I think it's really irrefutable if you think about it.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this, but he is very well known and very well respected. And one thing I want to mention for our listeners, Darin, that I appreciate about you is that, and they should just all know this, that Darin is doing a great job of getting permission to play some of these clips too. So we just feel like that's a good way to do that, is to have permission from those organizations.
Amen, brother.
So thank you for doing that. But I think, to kind of break that down a little bit, because he is, you have to really listen carefully, because he's so intelligent, and he goes through step by step. But he's essentially there are only 2 possibilities. As one is that what we would think of as evolution. And I know within evolution, there are different ways to talk about that, but either everything came from nothing or everything came from something or someone. And he mentions that there are these 2 possibilities, both of which would have to have all kinds of power. And he mentions kind of this idea of numbers or some kind of a personal being. And I don't think any of us would jump on board with saying that some kind of number or force somehow did all this, that there has to be, in order for there to be a creation, there has to be a creator of some sort, if we go with that view. And so he's saying, if I understood him correctly, is that in order for someone to create space and time and everything we see, that being would have to be outside of space and time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, you win. I don't know what you just won, but you won something.
well, I'll see if I can get 2. I'll see if I can get 2 prizes here. The other thing he talks about is that this particular being, in order to create all this, would have to be uncaused. And one of the reasons that's so important is sometimes atheists will argue, and because any of us with our worldview, you go back and back and back to the beginning, and they say, what started all that? Well, if there really is this being that created all this, that being didn't have to have a beginning, and that's precisely what he's saying. And now, William Lane Craig, he hasn't mentioned. He did talk about some type of a personal being, but he hasn't mentioned Jesus. He hasn't talked about Christianity, Christian teachings, or anything. He's just saying that it makes sense for there to be something that was already there to create everything that's already here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That deserves a second prize. That was pretty good.
I don't know. Don't get greedy.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I got out of it is he's saying, and here's the thing I see atheists do. They come back with this, well, who created God? And what they're not doing, and I'm talking about just on a basic level, there are atheists who try to answer the deep philosophical questions.
Right.
So I'm not saying that. But generally what happens is they come back with the who created God. And
Right.
what William Craig is doing there is he's showing how God had to create time. He had to create the universe. He had to create the laws and the mathematics. And you mentioned mathematics, and it's I tell you, truth is stranger than fiction. But there are people out there that think that mathematics kind of is like the power behind this in a way. I was watching some show, I don't remember what it was, may have been a YouTube with a math expert, and he was showing how everything is controlled by math. Everything's math. And I'm thinking, God created math. You would think that the master architect is going to use all that math that we use when we create things.
Yeah.
This makes sense. But to him, math was like, I don't know if he would call it the first cause as much as he saw that there is a power there. And we may discuss that more when we're going to try to get to some of these points.
He may not have been loved very well as a young child. That's why
it's just interesting, really. And I tell you, we're planning on bringing on guests at some point and just discussing that particular apologetic and how mathematics proves God would be a good subject that we may go more in depth on.
Right. And one thing that's so important, too, when we think of what he called the uncaused first cause, is that even though I think in many ways that's hard for any of us to wrap our brains around, it is not illogical. And it's not a paradox, because sometimes that's something people will say as well. But actually, it makes more sense that there had to be something already there to create everything. And so even though it's tough to get our minds around, it's not illogical in any way.
Absolutely. So I think what I want to do is let's carry that forward on his website. He's got 8 points. And for those who are listening, it's reasonablefaith.org, so that you can look it up and you could just do a search. He's got 8 points here I thought we would just discuss briefly.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, we're probably only going to get through a couple. We're just about out of time. Can you believe that, brother?
I can't believe it. There may be people listening who wish we were out of time a long time ago.
Well, let's hope not. But these 8 reasons, number 1 is God is the best explanation for why anything exists. And then I'm just going to go right to number 2, because then he says he is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. So 1 and 2 are basically the same. And this goes back to just the witness of creation around us, the overwhelming evidence of a creator. That's pretty much 1 and 2 is kind of the same thing. He's just the best explanation for everything we see around us. Yeah.
And I think just to comment on that, one analogy, and I don't know if I've heard William Lane Craig talk about this. He may have talked about something similar, but a couple other apologists too have this scenario where you'd be on a beach and somebody's written the word help in the sand, for example, and say you and I, Darin, showed up there a few weeks later, and we might see that, and I say to you, hey, do you think that just happened by chance? And you probably say, well, no, I think somebody had to actually write that. Well, that's the best explanation, but we don't have to know everything about God. We don't have to know really anything about God to see that there had to be some intelligence behind that. And that's important as well, because it's another kind of straw man. If people don't know that term, that's just kind of an easy way to say that there's an argument against something without really investigating it. But people will say, well, I have to know everything about this God. You really don't. You can just look around, and I think that's what he's getting at in these first 2 points, is that God is the best explanation. That's without us really doing much investigation on who that God is.
Absolutely.
Just want to give listeners quick encouragement as we head out of this podcast, is that a lot of people who are not Christians think that it's not based on faith, it's not based on evidence, it's just kind of this feeling I have, and I just want to let you know that is not true, that it is something that you can look for evidence and test. And sometimes people don't even know that, and just that in and of itself might give you just one more reason to explore Jesus and the Christian faith.
Well, brother, we're going to have to wrap it up there, and we'll start with point number 3, the next one.
Do I, just real quick, do I get a second prize? Because I'm not sure if I want to go on the next
No,
podcast.
you didn't hear me. I told you that was getting greedy and you don't get another prize.
Well, that was a few minutes ago, brother.
All right, folks, we'll see you next time.
She combs her hair as she looks in the mirror, prepares herself for the day ahead. To the well to get some water. You never know what a day will bring.
You've been listening to The Flaming Sword. Until next time, remember, love the sheep. Shoot the wolves.